And welcome to our PatternFly demo. This demo occurs every 2 weeks, rotating between 9 a.m. EST and 11 a.m. EST, so we can accommodate all time zones. In our demo agenda, we have our forum linked where every single sprint are answering questions about PatternFly and our progress. And I also hope this meeting today helps answer any questions you may have about what we're working on currently. I'll be posting this meeting on our YouTube channel, and please feel free to be on the lookout or send it to folks you think would also be interested. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So for interaction design, well, specifically on visuals, Mary's going to show us touch spin and slider.
Let me share real quick. All right, so I'll start with touch spin. So this I just did the spec for yesterday, so I think it's pretty much donezo at this point. So this is basically just for, incrementally selecting or increasing and decreasing quantities. So it's a pretty standard element. We went back and forth about how we wanted to style the clickable plus and minus buttons. And we decided to actually give them like the rounded edges like a button instead of, the complete square edges like the copy to clipboard element has. We looked at that too, since visually it is kind of similar, but it just didn't quite seem like the right thing to do, so we went with button style. Then I also just mocked it up with, in the case of it having units, so like 90% as opposed to the quantity of 90 units. And then also looked at it when there's, units kind of coming before the component itself. So nothing too complicated happening here. And then for the slider, I looked at kind of two main options, a discrete slider, so where you essentially have the ability to select a number. I guess that it doesn't have to be whole numbers, but essentially just a specific number, and there's these notches to kind of guide where you end up going. So you can't just kind of select any random number. It's kind of out of a given range. Then continuous sliders, you have the ability to do really any possible value that is between the start and end range of the slider. So I looked at it where we have just sliding without, a numeric indicator, and then, the ability to type in the numbers as well if you didn't want to actually do the action of sliding. Then I looked at two options also kind of as add-ons that I know are something that would be useful because we just saw it in a use case with OpenShift and Kiali. So is the ability to codependent sliders. So, let's say all three of these sliders worked together towards, let's say it had to add up together, they all had to add up to 100%. So once you select the amount of one, you can lock that number in and then continue to edit the others. And then similarly, there's another option that it visually looks really similar. So it has icons on the outside, but you can, you'd start out with one slider for whatever your use case is, but then you would have the ability to add additional, and then you could easily get rid of it if you decide that you didn't want it. So this one isn't quite done yet. There's still a few things I need to work out, but I think it's getting there. So I think that that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Mary. Any questions for Mary? All right, Michael's going to present Toolbar Refactoring.
Yep, thanks, Rachel. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we wanted to refactor the toolbar because initially we designed it pretty specifically for use in the top of our tables and headers, and that worked actually really well. But when it came time to put toolbars and other components, we started to realize it wasn't scaling that well. So we wanted to kind of bring it back and go with a more kind of simple approach that was both simpler to design for and then also simpler to implement. So we actually went back to an approach that we had before our current iteration of the toolbar. So to start off, I wanted to just kind of mention that the toolbar is generally going to be 36 pixels tall, and this is to match our buttons and our input field height. So anything that's not this tall would just be centered within the toolbar. And the reason that we are doing this is because most components that the toolbar will be placed in will already have its own padding. So a card, for example, has padding on that card, and we don't need any extra padding on the toolbar to just add on to that padding. So the basic approach we're taking is we're going to have items in a toolbar, and then there's going to be groups of items in the toolbar. And when you have a group of items, you can see 3 examples here. Any amount of items can be in a group, and any kinds of items can be in a group. They don't have to be the same kind of items. So here you see a group of icons, group of buttons, and then a group of a single button and icons. And whenever you have items within a group, there's 16 pixels of spacing between those items, no matter what they are. So it's just always the same. And then you can have multiple groups of items within one toolbar. And when you have 2 groups of items that are generally different components, we just are going to try bumping up the spacing to 24 pixels between those groups. So you can see here there's still 16 pixels of spacing between each item in the group, but between the 2 groups, the group of buttons and the group of icons, we've got a 24 pixel spacer. I wanted to be a little conservative there, so we might need to bump that up if we start using it and see that's not enough. But another kind of, I guess, feature that we want to include is this vertical divider, especially for situations like this where you see we've got multiple groups of the same items. So you can see we've got a group of buttons on the right, and then a group of icons next to it, and then a group of icons again next to that group of icons, and then a filter input group. And between those 2 groups of icons, that 24 pixels of spacing just isn't enough, and 32 pixels of spacing just feels like too much. So we use a vertical divider to kind of help distinguish those 2 groups of items. And this is a totally random toolbar, so I just, the alignment icons were just a logical group that came to mind when I was making this. So I think between having that the option of 24 pixels or this vertical divider, I think those should be enough for distinguishing between groups of items in the toolbar. And then I just wanted to note that a single item, so you might not always have a group or groups of groups of items. And you might just have a single item. So in this case, we've got a button, but it's not a part of the group of icons to the left. It's just its own button. And in that case, we're going to treat it as a group. So single icons are always treated as their own group. And because of that, it's going to have 24 pixels of spacing next to it instead of the 16, which is only for items within a group. And then I just want to give an example. A big part of refactoring this was so that we could get this to work in smaller spaces, and a card is a perfect example of that. So you can see on the left there, the card we've got a header area and a body area, and all around the card is 24 pixels of spacing. So going back to what I was saying, where the toolbar itself doesn't have that padding because it inherits it from the component. And then we've got that just a small toolbar with a single item, the same one I showed before, a single item and a couple icons, or an icon group next to it, right up there next to the header in the header area. And that's pretty much exactly how I think we want it to work. And so it can work at this scale, and it can also work at the scale that we saw before, where it's much larger. That's it. Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael. And James is going to share area violation corrections.
Hey, so I'm going to share my screen. Anyone see?
Yes,
All
we
right,
can.
cool. So there are two tickets that I tackled earlier. The first one is violation corrections 613. The merge ticket is 1544. The other one is for 617, and the merge ticket is 1575. So the first one tackles a few violations: the about modal box, buttons, and toolbar, and also going back into PF3, the alert upgrade examples. So I'm going to go through the first one right now. The about modal box, open it up, inspect. Most of these are buttons. So the first issue was to tackle and make sure that the labels for the close button actually has a close dialog with an area label. The next one is our buttons. That's the majority of the buttons that we have. So if we go to any of these, this actually specifically the states actually. Go to these. Bottom. Added the area labels for the remove. The next one is actually the toolbar. This is a big chunk. Mostly buttons again. So if we go, not this one, sorry. In full page mode, we're going to do the axe, inspector mode. We're going to also remove this. The little trick. This brings up 37 items instead of one item. So now you can actually see the rest of the other different toolbar options embedded inside the different functions. And most of these tickets are actually dealing with a kebab. And what we did was we made sure that the ID matched along with the area labels. It's called actions. You gave them accessibility options for the kebabs because before they didn't say anything. And the last one is a PF3. Also, again, buttons. Buttons must have discernible text. So again, with this one, it's a kebab with an actions. Before I didn't. Next ticket, again, it's 1575. This only has 2 violations corrected. It actually has a third, the toolbar, which we already covered in the last one. So we'll just go through with this one. The options menu, we gave it accessibility options, and as well as the pagination. So the options itself now has buttons. There's ARIA label buys, options menu, single example label. And then for the pagination, these little guys on the top, forwards, backwards, ARIA labels. Go to first, go to previous page, go to next page, go to last page. And that's it. Any
Great. Thank you,
questions?
James. All right, and Michael's going to share a few CSS improvements.
Hello. Okay, let's see. The first update was adding a description to our login component. This was inspired by the single sign-on version of the PatternFly 3 login component, where you could put something like logging into the particular application that you're logging into as a subheader to the main header, but this can be used just in a general login form as a description as well. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. The next was in our table component, we didn't have support for captions, just the caption element. And so you can add a caption element as the first thing in the table, and you'll get this styling. The next thing was in our tabs component. We had mentioned a particular use of tabs where you can use tabs inside of the navigational element or the nav element in HTML, but that was reserved for a pretty specific use case. It's when the set of tabs that you're implementing only exists once on the page. You don't have multiple versions of it, then you can use the nav element along with your tabs. And when you're using the nav element in your tabs, you also need a specific ARIA label. So we didn't have an example of that. The documentation for it was all just kind of included in the primary tabs documentation here. So we split that out into a separate example, implemented a version of tabs with just primary tabs, also primary and secondary, so that you can see how we're using the nav element with tabs, and you can note the ARIA documentation that's specific to this HTML configuration below it. And coming probably in the next demo, we're going to add support for the A element to be used as links inside of the navigational element tabs. So currently all of these tab buttons are buttons, like literal HTML buttons. We want to add the ability to use an anchor element for these, for the tab buttons instead. And the last thing I had was with the chip component. Just we needed a variation of the chip that didn't have a close button that you couldn't remove. It was a static one that we're calling read only. And so you can see that here. It just accepts text, doesn't have a close button, and you use a modifier of PFM read only to achieve that. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Michael. Any questions? All right, so next we're going to be sharing the website work, and I'll just preface this work by saying the visual design for the site hasn't been applied yet to our workspace, so everything is very much a work in progress, and still great to cover the progress that we're making here, but stay tuned for the visual design. And Gina's going to share full page mode.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to share my screen. So we have certain components and especially demos that can only be seen and in full page mode, and the link is currently just a text that says that. So this is what I was thinking for an example that can only be seen in that space, and hopefully we could just show a screenshot of it in like a card format like I have here. This icon is what we currently also use to show that you can also open it that way. So like Rachel said, this is a work in progress, but this is what I came up with for it, just so that the user knows kind of what they're getting into beforehand, in addition to the example name. And then the components and layouts that are used within the demo, this is specific for demos, will be listed here as tags. And then you can click on them and it will take you to that specific component or layout. Yep, and that's all.
Great. Any questions for Gina? All right, and Joachim's going to share some website work as well.
Yes, just a second, sorry. All right, can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so the first one is not too exciting. If you go to our website, v2.patternfly.org, at the top we have these main navigation items. And before they would, if you hovered over, you would see a link for a specific page. But now we have redirects in place, so you'll just see like a /documentation/design guidelines. And then within our configuration, we can easily add the redirects for any page. So that's the first one. Next, we've got a new component that I added called the variable link component. So this is one of the first set of components that we have to enable documentation or to make it easier to do certain things. In this case, this variable link component allows us to add this link to documentation, and it'll link to the global variables grid. So sorry, I added one example here. So just running locally, I just made an example just so you guys can see. But within this icons documentation, I added this link for light border color. And when you click on it, it navigates you to the CSS variables grid filtered on that item. And of course, you can always start to see more if you wanted to. So that's next. Then there's one more thing. There's one more component that I added for documentation purposes that basically allows us to add links to any headings. So, even within our documentation, if you hover over now, you'll get these links and you can click on them, you can navigate to them, you can bookmark them. So this should now be enabled in most places for our documentation. So we've already had it within our regular documentation pages, but now we have it for other pages as well using this new tool. Next, oh yeah, so that was the auto link header. Okay, finally, global search. So this happened all yesterday, but finally it came together. So now we've got this little search box here. It's going to be completely customizable via CSS. So this is just a bare bones implementation right now. But if you start to type in, boom. So alert, we can see that we've got alert under React, we've got alert under components, we've got alert mentioned in the design guidelines. So this is the first step to have global search here. And of course, you can click on any of this and then navigate to that component. And I believe that's it. And I think that concludes the website section. I was just going to pick up the next section for React 2, Rachel, since I'm already going.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. So the wizard component was added. So you can see it right here, PatternFly React. This is what it looks like. And of course, these are just examples. This is a very simple example. You've got all these steps and you've got several sub-steps, and you can click through, and as you click through, you kind of activate them, so you can always backtrack if that's how you want to configure your wizard. There are several ways to configure the wizard, and this is one of them. But yeah, you can click through, and then once you get to the last step, you can customize this behavior, but you can either close it or save it, whatever you need to do. A little bit more interesting examples. The next one, the validation wizard. So I've got my first step. I click next. You can see I've got some validation form, which is quite common in wizards. You can see the next button is disabled, so it wants me to make this a number. I'm 5, so then the next button is enabled, and I can go forward. Same here, and of course this is also mobile friendly, so you can see this whole wizard also works in the mobile view. But yeah, this is the real power behind all of this is there's really only 2 or 3 required properties for the wizard: steps, title, on, close, on, save. And the real power is in the steps configuration object, which is where you can configure what the steps are actually for the wizard. And in this object, you just give it a name for the step. And if it's a sub-step, you can just define like a sub-steps array within it. But either way, you end up giving it a component, which can be a simple tag. It can be simple HTML tags, or it could be a React component. So you basically have a lot of power to make each wizard step what you need it to be, and you can configure the conditions to enable the next button from the step, and you can also disable buttons as well, all from this configuration. And that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Joachim, you're blowing up the chat there. You're getting a lot of cheers.
Thanks.
All right. And Zach is going to share TypeScript Conversion.
Yeah, so I'll try to make this fast. I'll share my screen. Right. You guys see? Hopefully, yeah.
Yes, we
So
can.
this is just a whole lot of behind the scenes work to let our components start getting converted into TypeScript. So these are just things that needed to happen so that we can start writing our components differently. And I'll go ahead and show what the changes are. So here's our about modal box, and on the left is what it is now, and then on the right is how it is in TypeScript. And there are a few advantages to doing it this way, mostly that if you're a dev working on PatternFly React, you get to have type safety at compile time. So you can know right away if you're using about modal box anywhere, this component, whether or not you're passing it the right properties. And it's also a little clearer how we do the default properties here. Because some people were doing this anyway, and it's like, well, you're setting it two places, like here and in here, so there needs to be a right way to do it, and this is it. So yeah, lots of behind the scenes work for TypeScript.
Great. Thank you, Zach. And Tatani with Context Selector.
Can you see my screen? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can. Yep,
Okay,
we can hear you.
Great. So I work from a context selector. Here it is. You click on the toggle, and then this panel appears with a search button. A search input and button, and the available options. So, and type in there, and it will filter out the list. That's a user-defined interaction. So the consumer would rather define what happens when you type in the search box. And right now there's some questions on the PR about whether this button is actually needed, or if it maybe should not be, like maybe if it should be an icon or something. But there's some discussion about that. And then I have a couple of other accessibility issues that I'm working through on this. But that's pretty much it for the context selector.
Okay, great. Any questions for Tatani? All right. Katie's going to share single select.
All right. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right, so I want to quickly go over the single select input. This is the select input. It's slightly different than the form select, kind of in function and styling. So if I open it here, you can see it's got the PF styling versus just the native form styling. And you can select a input, and if you open the menu again, you can see it's highlighted. This style right here is subject to change based on some CSS input, because initially the class for highlighting the selected input wasn't there. So that might look different down the line, but for now it's just bolding it. It also works with keyboard input, so I can just move my mouse, space to close, I can enter to open. If you enter to open, it actually, it will automatically select the current input. So you can actually like toggle it in that way and select different inputs. And the other interesting thing is that this is the first variant for the select. So select will actually have several different variants, like checkbox, which I'm currently working on and almost done, and type ahead and multi-type ahead selects. So the actual component won't change, but the variant variable is all you should have to change. I think that about covers it.
Great, thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie? All right, Dana's going to share a change to help you if React import CSS.
All right, so it's still a little in progress, but I wanted to present about it here. Screen to share. See Galaxy, Rachel.
Yep.
So, all right. So briefly, what we've been doing in the past in the React space is we've been having a parse and embedding our styles right in line. And we've decided to make a change to this, just a simple, relatively simple change, but we're going to require the style sheet now. And as part of our React build, we'll see a CSS in the output. And what this allows us to do is, so here's it running with just an alert, is it allows us to now use Webpack extract plugins. So right now, this is the regular where the styles will show up is just right in line in a style tag. But with Webpack, we can then change the kind of loader we use now so that we can pull these out so that they're not all embedded in the DOM like they are currently. And if people start looking at the way the React styles work, you'll see a lot of these data emotion tags, which effectively keep adding individual styles as you navigate through the site. So that's a bit inefficient, and it also doesn't allow for a flow where somebody would want to customize PatternFly. So by doing this, they can extract the CSS into a file. They can choose not to use the bundled CSS from React. They could just use the full PatternFly CSS from core and pull that in like a lot of projects are. Or they can even use the Sass from core and compile it to exactly what they want and enable that. And all they'll have to do is just change the Webpack configuration. So in the week or two to come, we'll provide samples of different Webpack configurations that would show how to disable the CSS loading or extract it and then not use it for people. And this is something that we have been wanting to investigate and provide a solution for a long time and continue to optimize around this. And there's going to be some work still to come in this, but this is the first step in reducing the footprint of how Patternfly affects the DOM, especially when using React moving forward. And we'll, like we said, we'll provide some more documentation as well as an architectural overview of how we feel CSS could be used. There's basically three options, as we mentioned. So compiling the Sass is kind of like the expert level. Using Patternfly CSS full is kind of a mid-level. And then just taking the CSS that's bundled right in React is if you just want to get going quickly. That's kind of like the basic tier of the fastest way to get going with Patternfly. That's all.
All right, that's the end of our agenda today. Are there any questions for our team? Okay, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.